Welcome to our webinar. I should say a big thank you for giving up your time. We appreciate how busy people are. So yeah, thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Kiteworks, You've Got Mail. So what we'll be doing is giving you a really good overview of Kiteworks as a solution, but having a focus on how we can help you improve your security around email, which is still one of the most popular methods of communication when it comes to sharing content with our external and internal users. In terms of who you got on the call, so you got myself, Scott Chenery, Regional Manager for UK and Ireland, and then my colleague Ben Reddings, Field Solutions Engineer. Ben's been with Kiteworks for a number of years now in a number of different engineering roles, so he's got a deep knowledge of Kiteworks as a solution, but also some of the problems and issues our customers face. And he's helped a lot of those resolve those. So we've got a lot of knowledge on today's webinar. We encourage questions. So you'll see within your Zoom window, you'll have a Q&A button, and you can just click that Q&A button, post your question at any point through the presentation. What we will do is get through the presentation itself and then answer those questions at the end. So yeah, feel free. We do encourage them. Ask anything that's pertinent to you, and then me and Ben will try and answer those as best we can at the end of the presentation. In terms of a brief agenda, I'm just going to give you a very high-level overview of Kiteworks and what we call the private content network, and then I'll hand over to Ben, who's going to go a little bit deeper into what encryption is, why it's important, especially within email, and then how and why some of our customers are using our email protection gateway, EPG. You'll hear EPG a lot of today, so that's email protection gateway, one of our applications within the Kiteworks solution that secures email. And then we'll look at some of the use cases, summarize, and then we'll get to those questions that we spoke about before. So Kiteworks, private content network, we've got a mixture of customers on today's webinar, but also prospective customers that may be looking at Kiteworks for the first time. So what is this private content network that we talk about? So I'll first start at the problem and why this exists. So for us, our customers, businesses out there today have got lots of applications that they're reliant on to operate their business, be profitable, etc. And typically some of those applications are systems of record and are producing vast amounts of data in different types of formats. So it could be contractual information, could be financial information, could be legal documents, but content that has private information, confidential information, potentially personal identifiable information. And they're creating lots of different types of those documents, different sizes of those documents. But essentially for the business to operate, that information has to be shared both internally and externally. And they do that via different delivery methods. So it could be that we send it by email. It could be that we share a file or a folder with a customer, but lots of different communications channels. So therefore, lots of different applications also managing the communication side. The biggest problem though is when that data has to be shared externally, it's going out across that public internet. And then we have an issue with those external users, our supply chain, our customers, clients, etc. We have very little visibility into where that data is, very little control over what those users can do with the data, but also not the level of security that we may need to meet compliance or to meet our own security policy that we have. The good news is there is a solution. That solution being Kiteworks and what we call a private content network. So those same applications, those same systems of records that you rely upon to produce the same content that has that potentially private information in is still being used. And still those communication channels want to be used, email, file sharing, etc. But what Kiteworks allows you to do is not have disparate systems for that. We can unify all of those communication channels because we communicate across all of those communication channels. So we can do file sharing, folder sharing, email. We can send a web form, a custom web form to a client, have them fill that out, attach sensitive information and send it back to us. So we can also collaborate with those external users. But we can unify all of those communication channels. We can even integrate into some of those systems of records as well. So we can integrate with Office 365, SharePoint, Salesforce to make it seamless in terms of how we share that data. And then when it comes to the point, we have that unification. So one single solution to do all of the management of the communication of our data. When it goes out of the business, when we have that problem of leaving the business to our external users, it actually will go to Kiteworks. And that's what we call our private content network, where Kiteworks can apply the highest level of security encryption to that data and then share that with those external users. But importantly, we talked about that visibility. We will have all that tracking of where that data is, that full audit trail of where is my data right now, where is it being uploaded, downloaded, etc. And at the same time, and for me, it's another layer of that security that Kiteworks offers. We can give you all of the control. So any policy-driven control you want to put on that documentation or that data, those files, whether it's a regulatory body or compliance that is forcing you to have that control, or whether it's your own security policies, we can put the control on that information to say, does this information expire after 30 days? Can that user actually download or only view that content? Again, all in one solution, one place. And then from a deployment point of view, we have to be very flexible. So although we see seeing a big move to the cloud with our customers, we still do have quite a lot of our customers still requiring on-prem solutions. So we can do on-prem, we can host it, we can have a hybrid cloud where our customers host it. We can be very flexible in terms of how this solution delivers. So we can unify all of your communication channels and send it all out via Kiteworks. And then we can have all the security, the traceability, and the control over it. And that's what we call our private content network. And that falls nicely into our mission. We just want to basically ensure that all of our customers are confident that when any of their users or even a system sends information that has secure content in it out to external and internal users, they're meeting compliance and they're not exposing their business to risk because it's going to be highly secure. And why we have that mission, primarily today, is driven by compliance. So I've just got a few verticals here of some of the different compliances and regulations that are applicable, but this falls into other verticals: manufacturing, pharmaceutical, legal, insurance, etc. So more and more we're seeing compliance as a driver to why customers use Kiteworks to share their sensitive information. Me and Ben have just completed, for example, a big project in the UK where Section 62 of the Data Protection Act now asks for justification of why you're sharing content that could contain confidential information and have an audit log of that justification. So there's more and more of this compliance coming into play. But outside of compliance, for example, we have one of the largest car manufacturers in the world, and they're more interested, one of their primary use cases is around intellectual property. When they have a latest design of a car or any information like that, and they need to share that externally, their main focus is that they don't want that. They want that to be highly secure. They don't want it to fall into the wrong hands. So they want all that security control around the content they're sharing. But we are seeing a big driver via compliance, but there are other use cases for our customers. But the point of today's webinar, before I hand over to Ben, is hopefully that's given you an overview of Kiteworks does, what the private content network is, that we can deliver across multiple communication channels. But the primary focus today is email, still the most popular method of sending information and of communication. I know me as a user, I type my email, I put my recipients in, I may attach a document, I send it. Am I interested whether that's encrypted, whether the body of the message is encrypted? Not really, I'm just a user. That poses a big risk. There's big exploitation on exchange servers. We're seeing at the moment a big spike in that activity. So we need to make sure that the emails our users are sending is still very easy for the user to send, but in the back end, we are making sure it is highly secure to ensure that we don't have any sort of attacks or breaches of our data. So with that, I'll hand over to Ben, who's going to go into more detail of how this all looks, how it works, and how our customers are using it today.
Thank you very much, Scott. So we talked very briefly about just now the kinds of threats and the kind of prevalence of attacks against email infrastructure. So that's certainly something that we're going to go into a little bit. And initially, we'll start that with the basis of why is it that we actually secure our email? Why do we apply encryption? And how can we apply encryption? And those are all subjects that we're going to look at over the next few minutes. In terms of why we secure our email, it's important to note, as Scott mentioned on a previous slide, that email infrastructure presents an incredibly attractive target. And in order to ask why, you need to think about what it is that you're sending through email. When we send all sorts of personal identifiable information, healthcare information through email, it is still a primary communication technology that we're using to communicate all sorts of information. Now, lots of studies were performed around the prevalence of data breaches, particularly in 2020, 2021, and these all reported the same findings, essentially, that there were 3 top mitigating factors of against data breaches, which are encryption, AI, and of course security analytics. So encryption, very, very important for mitigating against data breaches there. Which brings us on to our next slide, which is that essentially encryption ensures confidentiality and protects data. So essentially that's why we use encryption with email. It's why we use encryption technologies when transmitting secure content. However, it's transmitted very, very commonly, of course, that is by email. But what is it in itself about encryption that's helpful? Well, of course, there is, with encryption, essentially anything that is sent in an encrypted form, if the receiving side does not have the ability to decrypt that, then all an attacker is getting, if they're sat in the middle intercepting that communication, all they're getting is essentially garbage. They're not able to decrypt that, and therefore they're not able to access that sensitive content, that revealing information, whether it's intellectual property, whether it's healthcare data, or whatever exactly that content is. So this allows us that secure communication from that sender right through to the recipient, and it doesn't matter if there are people in the middle grabbing that content and trying to snoop on what we're doing. We can pretty much guarantee that that is going to happen in a secure way. But in addition to ensuring the confidentiality and protecting that data, it's important to note, of course, that we can use that also for verifying and guaranteeing the integrity of that data. So we can guarantee that that data itself has not been modified in any way, if it's still coming through in that correct encrypted format. But encryption itself is not without its challenges. And that's something that we're certainly going to cover off today, and how we help with those challenges. Because one of the main challenges with encryption is it can be quite complicated. Encryption itself is quite a scary word for end users. It can be a scary word for non-technical members, even for some technical members, because encryption itself is fundamentally highly mathematical and highly complicated. It's really, really important, therefore, that when we're dealing with employees who are not tech savvy or who are tech savvy but simply aren't familiar with encryption, or we have a very, very large organization, or if there's a highly complex infrastructure, that we're able to find ways to apply encryption with a very, very high degree of user simplicity. As I just mentioned, I mean, encryption inherently gets more complicated when we have non-technical users or large complex organizations. So in order to ensure that the users are able to accept this new technology, it's very, very important that it is very, very user-friendly. It's important that it supports automation for key management and new user onboarding. This is really critical so that the non-IT members, or again, just simply unfamiliar users with encryption, are able to accept this technology and are able to learn how to use it very, very quickly and easily, because typically these internal users quite often are not trying to find these holes within your security architecture across your estate. More often they're simply trying to get their jobs done. They're trying to meet deadlines. They're trying to keep their bosses happy. They're trying to achieve their project goals, and in doing so, if technologies that are given to them in order to achieve these goals in a secure way are very complicated, very difficult to use, and end users have a bit of a habit of trying to circumvent these technologies, again, simply with the best intentions of getting their jobs done. So it's very, very important that the technologies that we're giving them to protect their content and to apply these levels of security are easy to use, and are easy to be accepted by the end users with minimal training. Now, in addition to this, we have some other challenges with encryption. With various different kinds of encryption technology or large well-known technology, we have potential problems with things like the Cloud Act. Now, what the Cloud Act does is legitimizes access to by US authorities to data which is stored on servers of American companies, even when it's not in America. And there are simple solutions for this, but this essentially means that if you've got, if you have members of the FBI or the CIA or NSA and so on with legitimate reasons, then they can essentially force US companies to reveal data when they are able to decrypt that data and to provide that to US authorities, potentially revealing your intellectual property and so on. Now, we have a very simple solution for that, which is applicable to Kiteworks, and it extends to Kiteworks EPG, which is that when you encrypt your data with Kiteworks, or when you encrypt your data with EPG, you control the key yourselves. You own the keys. We as a vendor do not have any access to your content, and we do not own the key. That's owned by our customers. Therefore, US authorities or other regulatory or other government authorities operating under similar acts are unable to access your data, even when it's stored on the cloud by us on your behalf, as we simply do not have access to your content. Those encryption keys are managed and owned by yourselves. So let's dive a little bit deeper into why our customers use Email Protection Gateway, Kiteworks EPG specifically. Well, there's a lot of different reasons why our customers use EPG with Kiteworks. And one of those is that we are able to extend full encryption coverage to every email containing sensitive content that moves in and out of the organization natively in standard email clients like Outlook, Gmail, Thunderbird, and so on. So what do we mean by that? We mean no plugins. So there's no need to install and have your users trained to use new complicated plugins. We can simply integrate natively with these email applications and apply a strong level of automation and transparency to that user, so that if users are sending things through Outlook and there are certain things that need to be protected, encrypted, we can either allow the user to simply do it directly from Outlook, or we can catch that in the gateway with our extremely flexible rule engine and apply rules on these emails to say if it's to a specific sender, then we're going to go ahead and encrypt that. If it's from a specific person, we'll encrypt that. Or if there are specific files, specific subject lines, AIP labels, and so on. But we will get into that a little bit later on as well. And of course, it allows you to protect your inbound email as well. So extending email protection and policy enforcement to incoming email as well as outgoing email, because that's also very important. If we're dealing with very, very sensitive content with external users and we're sending that out and that's protected, that's of course very, very beneficial. However, what we really need is to ensure there's a way for those external users to respond with either content updates or their own sensitive content and provide them a protected way in which they can get that to us as well. In addition, as Scott mentioned briefly earlier, we have comprehensive and automated tracking and controls. It's very, very important for lots of compliance reasons, as well as other security reasons, that we can not only secure content and protect content as it leaves our organization, but verify and prove that it left our organization in a protected fashion. It can be very important for audits, very important to meet our compliance regulations and so on. But it's really important that we're able to prove that these things happened in a secure way, rather than just applying these configurations and applying these technologies and then sending it all out. We need to be able to track that and order that retrospectively and verify exactly what happened to our content. Where was it delivered to? Was it delivered to the correct recipients, and so on? And ultimately, this allows you to reduce risk as you eliminate steps by giving the encrypt or not decision for each email to automated policies. It can be given to users if you like, but also we can apply a very high degree of automation on EPG, so that, again, coming back to those rules I mentioned, if we have a group of users sending emails out, maybe they're parts of our legal team and they're lawyers sending very, very sensitive information, we can apply an automated encrypt or not decision on the gateway. So when that goes through the gateway, we're simply going to decide whether or not that content needs to be protected and encrypted. And then, of course, coming back to a very key point, we allow you to expand protection of private data from blind access. Again, we're referring to things like the Cloud Act and protecting from those particular acts, allowing you to control the keys yourself. Kiteworks protects Microsoft and protects you from governments and other organizations from accessing your data stored and sent via Kiteworks. Files are encrypted and only you can grant those decryption rights. Again, to reiterate, even we as the vendor cannot access your content, even if that platform is hosted with us. We simply do not have access. You own the keys. And then finally, another key point is enhancing simplicity with existing Microsoft security. There are a huge array of Microsoft tools within email, O365, Exchange, AD, and so on, and we can integrate with those tools very, very nicely. Whether it's things like allowing users to use to encrypt emails directly from Outlook, but also things like AIP and MIP, or Azure Information Protection or Microsoft Information Protection. And these are those technologies that allow you to apply labels to emails and say, for example, this email is highly sensitive, or this email has a medium or low sensitivity. Now, what we can do is we can integrate directly with those labels, and we can either use those labels to perform specific actions. For example, if users label an email as highly sensitive, then we can action that, and then we can apply our level of encryption to those emails as they go through the gateway. Or if users or if internal users are using those labels to already encrypt their content inside the organization, we can intercept those mails as they go through EPG and remove the Microsoft encryption and apply our own encryption to ensure that the emails still go through in a protected form. But users who aren't using these technologies on the receiving side are given the access to these emails in a protected way, utilizing a different technology that allows them to access the content, for example, allowing them to log onto a web portal and collect the email via SSL. So we can integrate very, very nicely with these tools to automatically add these labels, to automatically remove these labels, or to simply apply actions based on these labels, ensuring again that there's that very high degree of simplicity for your external users. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about how Kiteworks EPG works. So I know many of you will be familiar with the Kiteworks deployment in terms of an on-premise cloud-hosted deployment and so on, where with Kiteworks, what we have are roles. So each individual system will be running a web server, file storage system, the databasing services, and so on, allowing you to accommodate the requirements of the users on these specific systems. So what EPG does is it simply is an additional Kiteworks node that allows you to accommodate this EPG functionality. It's part of our general Kiteworks technology stack, and it simply joins in and allows you to perform this email protection, again, both inbound and outbound, within that same Kiteworks stack with that same level of auditing, same level of control and administration, and so on. And another really key point of what EPG does and some of the things and some of the ways it works. We also provide the ability to translate between different standards and methods of encryption. So I mentioned this briefly when we were talking about the Microsoft's AIP and MIP technologies. What do we mean by this? Well, we mean if user A inside the organization sends an email to user B outside the organization, and user A is already very familiar with encryption, and so is user B, but they use different kinds of encryption. Then user A sends an email through to this user. The EPG system will catch that with user A's encryption and say, okay, brilliant. So I'm familiar with this. I know what kind of encryption this user is using. But this receiving user is using a different kind of encryption that I'm also familiar with because I've onboarded that user. Well, the EPG gateway in the middle will simply decrypt that message from user A and then re-encrypt that message using user B's encryption. Therefore, we can perform this transparent translation where user A and user B are both able to communicate securely. And that works both ways as well. So if user B then responds with their native encryption, let's say PGP, and then it gets to EPG, and EPG says, well, actually, user A, they're familiar with SMIME, will decrypt that PGP encrypted email, and then re-encrypt it with SMIME and deliver that to the internal user. Now we have a completely protected email throughout the entire process, but we're performing that transparent translation in the middle. And again, this all comes back to our simplicity story. So neither of the users are aware of this, but they're both getting a very, very simple experience and a very well protected email communication. So before we wrap up and look at and head over to some questions, let's just take a little bit more of a look at some of the key EPG email protection gateway use cases and some of the ways that our platform can be used. Now, the first one is external encryption. So in this case, what we have is emails being sent by internal users from, let's take Outlook, for example, on a typical Exchange mail server. So users are communicating internally simply using Outlook, and those emails are going around the internal organization, and there is no activity taking place from EPG. However, when a user sends an email outside the organization, Exchange is then going to hand off these emails to EPG, which is going to then automatically apply encryption and then send that email on to the receiving user. Now, that can be a number of different ways. It can be forced to a specific way, but most commonly what that will happen then is when that gets to the receiving user, is that receiving user is going to get essentially an invitation, very similar to Kiteworks. I think you've been sent a secure message, click here to set your account up and decide how you want to receive that. And then it's simply the case of following the steps in a very, very simple wizard, creating a password and deciding I'm going to log on to the web portal to collect this email and to reply, or I'm going to use my own encryption keys because I'm already familiar with encryption, or I'm going to, I'm using AIP and so on. That user is then onboarded. So then anything that the internal user sends to the external user, again, is going to go through EPG. And then it's going to be delivered to them in the way that they've said. So, for example, if they want that web portal, they're just going to web portal access. They're just going to log on and get all their secure emails from the web portal and reply in that way. But internal emails are not going through EPG, and so the important thing to note here is that mails will be stored on Exchange within a plain text, non-encrypted format. And that brings us on to our next use case, which is end-to-end or hybrid encryption. So in this case, we have encryption applied natively from the Outlook client. Now, here, EPG decrypts and provides recipient access again via the EPG onboarding. But it's important to note that in this case, all mail content is encrypted as soon as it leaves Outlook. So when it's sat on our Exchange server, it's still sat there within an encrypted format. But what happens is we're encrypting that natively from the Outlook application and sending that through EPG to external users. And then the EPG is then simply receiving that email, removing that encryption if required, and then facilitating that user access based on their own encryption if needed, or simply based on a web portal session. And then finally, our third key use case is encryption, automated encryption for business applications. So what we quite often have is a lot of financial organizations, for example, who have, let's take a credit card report as an example. They have 1,000 different credit card reports to send to 1,000 different external users, and they have their internal applications which are responsible for doing that. So what will happen is they will then communicate to EPG and dump these 1,000 emails directly onto EPG, which will act as a relay and allow and accept these emails, ready to process those. And then we're going to automatically apply security to those emails. And again, very important to note here with this example that we're very often dealing with non-technical external users. These could be any kind of user, and they're simply going to receive an email from their bank. You've been sent some secure content. Again, they're going to follow that onboarding, create an account, and be able to access their very, very sensitive financial information, their credit card reports through the secure EPG portal. And we can do that to facilitate automation. So again, if we've got these applications which are sending 1,000, 2,000 emails at a time, we can simply facilitate that with our EPG gateway so that the application can talk directly to us, and then we will then communicate those out directly. So in summary, what we've covered today are the integration of all channels in one platform in the private content network, how we secure those communications across your estate, whether they're secure email, whether they're secure file collaboration, SFTP, where it's automated transactions, email, and so on. We provide a platform with rock solid flexibility, security, and encryption translation to keep things nice and straightforward for your users and to ensure we get maximum acceptance. Significant simplicity for your users. Again, it's all about maximum acceptance. We don't want users looking for ways to circumvent these technologies. Fully tracked and auditable, so we can verify what's happened with my content and where it's gone with what level of security. With extensive integration for existing Microsoft technologies, including AIP and MIP, so we can leverage those and add significant value to those existing tools and existing technologies. All forming part of the Kiteworks core capabilities to allow us to unify, track, control, and secure your email, file sharing, automation, APIs, and web forms. At this stage, I'd like to open it up for any questions and just say thank you ever so much for being with us today.
Great, thank you, Ben, for that very in-depth overview of what we're doing. Hopefully that's been very helpful for all of our customers, and I say our prospective customers as well, maybe just looking at Kiteworks for the first time. But thank you, Ben, for that. Right, we said we would do questions at the start, so let's be true to our word and have a look what's going on. So we've got some questions here. I'm just skim reading them as I'm looking at them. So can we get a recording of today's session? Yeah, absolutely. So for all attendees and for registrants, so even if you've got, say, for example, some colleagues that couldn't make it, we will circulate the webinar out to you so that you can go over it again or share with colleagues. Alternatively, if you want to have further conversations with us, even a demonstration of how EPG looks or any other part of the Kiteworks private content network, happy to do so. But yeah, we will share the webinar. Can EPG be run in conjunction with our existing Kiteworks solution? So my answer would be yes, but I think probably Ben's better answer this because it probably provide more detail than me just simply saying yes.
like Scott says, essentially, it's a yes. So EPG will form part of our existing Kiteworks technology stack, and it can be run alongside or separately if needed. So that absolutely, that's a big yes.
Fantastic. What are some of your customers that are using the solution? So as I sort of said in my overview of the whole private content network, which EPG is a part of, we do find a lot of our customers are sort of heavy regulated customers or verticals, so large banks, financial institutions, legal organizations, pharmaceutical, that are heavily driven by compliance and regulation. So they have to comply. So they look to us to be able to secure all those communications of sensitive content. But as I said before, I don't think it's limited to that. More and more compliance and regulation absolutely are coming into organizations. But as I mentioned, that large manufacturer, they were more interested around their intellectual property. So it's very use case driven. So yeah, a vast majority of our business is with regulated organizations, but we are seeing more and more companies, businesses come to us with some unique use cases where they've got to share content data. We do quite a lot of UK government. We do a lot with the NHS, for example, around, could be patient data. So anywhere where there's sensitive content, it seems a bit broad for me to say this, but really any use case where you've got to share content that needs to be secured because of its sensitivity, yeah, we're seeing people come to us and want to use our solution for that. And then we've got, so EPG secures mail both outgoing and incoming. I think we went over this, but Ben, do you want to just touch on that again?
Yeah, certainly. So absolutely, it's very important to understand and to know that, of course, when we think about these secure communication channels, it's really important that we're providing our internal users the ability to send content out. And it's absolutely as important to provide them a way to secure their content coming back in, because if you're sending contracts or sensitive financial information out, and then they need to respond with the same level of sensitivity information, but they don't have a way to do that securely, then that of course is a problem. EPG can absolutely facilitate those external users responding back in a secure way as well, to ensure that we can secure both your outgoing and your inbound content. Absolutely.
Fantastic, thanks, Ben. I think that's the question queue has all been answered. As you'll see there, you've got mine and Ben's email addresses. If there's any follow-up questions, if you would like to talk to us more about anything, any of the offerings of Kiteworks, or even if it is EPG, you'd like to talk to us about how you can make your email, improve your email security, feel free to reach out to us. We'll share, as I said, share the recording, but it just leaves me to say a big thank you for giving up your time to join us today. I hope it was helpful, and I wish you well. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for joining. Great to have you on the call.